On a Tuesday, November 6, 2018, Elias Muro was fired after 22 years on the same land. They called it modernization, but the land never forgot who truly understood it. The morning they fired Elias Muro, the sun had not yet fully risen. It was the kind of early hour when the world is still half asleep, when the roosters are just beginning to find their voices, and the dew sits heavy on the grass like the land itself is sweating. Elias was already in the field. He was always already in the field. He had been working the Varga farm for 22 years. 22 years of calloused hands and aching knees. 22 years of planting and pruning and praying for rain at the right time. He knew every slope of that land, every patch where the soil thinned, and every corner where it stayed wet 3 days longer than the rest. He had walked those rows so many thousands of times that his footsteps had worn small valleys in the earth between the furrows. And then, on a cold Tuesday morning in March, Don Rinaldo Varga called him to the main gate. Don Rinaldo was not the kind of man who came to the fields himself. He was the kind of man who sent people. So when Elias saw the silver truck parked at the entrance, engine idling, he already felt something cold move through his chest. Don Rinaldo was standing outside the truck with two men Elias had never seen. Men in pressed shirts who carried clipboards and did not look at him when he approached. "Elias," Don Rinaldo said, not unkindly, but with the practiced detachment of a man who had rehearsed the moment. "We're making changes." Elias waited. He had learned, over 22 years, the wisdom of waiting. "We're bringing in a new operation," Don Rinaldo continued. "Modern, mechanized. These gentlemen have a system. Irrigation grids, soil sensors, satellite mapping. It's a different kind of farming now." One of the clipboard men smiled without looking up. "We won't be needing the old hands anymore." Old hands. Elias looked down at his. They were the color of good earth, dark and cracked and capable. He had used those hands to save the Varga melon crop in the drought of 2009 when everyone else had given up. He had used those hands to dig drainage channels in the floods of 2015, working 3 days straight without sleep. He had used those hands to carry Don Rinaldo's own father to the truck when the old man had a heart attack in the East Field 11 years ago, just after sunrise. He said nothing of this. He simply nodded, took his last wages in a manila envelope, and walked off the property without looking back. But here is the thing about a man who does not look back. It does not mean he has forgotten. Let me tell you what the town saw over the next few years. They saw Don Rinaldo invest heavily in the new operation. The clipboard men, a consulting firm from the city, came in with machines that cost more than most families in the valley would earn in a lifetime. They installed drip irrigation systems controlled by computer. They mapped the soil with sensors that sent data to tablets. They hired young agricultural technicians who wore boots that had never touched mud. The town watched, and some were impressed, and some were jealous, and most were simply curious. What happened next, though? That part is important. The first harvest under the new system was disappointing. Not catastrophically, but quietly, stubbornly, the yields fell short of what the consultants had projected. The melons in the south field were undersized. The tomatoes along the western ridge cracked before they could be picked. The soil sensors showed everything was fine. The computers said the water distribution was optimal. The satellite data confirmed the crop density was within acceptable parameters. But the fruit did not lie. The second year was worse. The consultants adjusted. They recalibrated. They brought in additional experts. They published reports with graphs and arrows and technical explanations. Don Rinaldo signed more checks. The machines hummed. The data flowed. The crops kept shrinking. By the third year, Don Rinaldo had borrowed against the land to cover the operational costs. The farm that his father had built across 40 years, the land that had fed the valley and sent 3 generations of Vargas to university. It was bleeding. Slowly. Politely. The way a man bleeds when he does not realize he's been cut. And where was Elias Muro during all of this? Nobody in town could say for certain. A few people claimed they had seen him in the province to the north, working a small plot he had rented. Someone else said he had gone into business with his brother-in-law. One old woman at the market said she had heard he was consulting for a cooperative 2 towns over, but she was known for embellishing, so nobody pressed her on the details. What everyone agreed on was that Elias had gone quiet, and quiet men, they said, were either broken or building. He came back on a Wednesday, no announcement, no silver truck, no clipboard men, just Elias Muro, 54 years old now, driving a modest white pickup with a cracked passenger side mirror. He pulled up to the agricultural office in town and spent 30 minutes with the registrar. He made 2 phone calls from the parking lot. He folded some papers into his shirt pocket and drove away. Nobody thought much of it. But 3 weeks later, when the notices appeared in the local registry, when the documents were filed and the transactions recorded and the stamp of the notary dried in ink, the town started to talk. Elias Muro had purchased the Varga farm, not a portion of it, not a partnership stake, not a lease agreement, all of it, every hectare. The eastern ridge where the soil ran red and rich, the south field that had always been temperamental, the main house, the storage buildings, the irrigation infrastructure the consultants had installed at great cost, all of it in full. The question that burned through every conversation at every table in every house was the same: how? Now, let me pause here because this is where the story becomes something more than just a story. After he was fired, Elias did not go home to grieve. He went north, yes, but not to rent a small plot for comfort. He went to study. He had always known the land in the way that long-experienced hands know things, intuitively, bodily, without complete language for it. He knew that the south field drained too fast in the dry months and held too much in the wet ones. He knew that the eastern ridge needed to rest every 3rd year or it would give you bitter fruit. He knew that the old well near the mango grove pulled from a different water table than the main irrigation, and that in the right configuration it could extend the growing season by 6 weeks. He knew all of this the way a musician knows a song, not from reading it, but from playing it 10,000 times. What he did not know, and what he went north to learn, was the language to explain it. The numbers, the terminology, the kind of knowledge that makes men in pressed shirts listen. He spent his savings on a short course in soil science. He borrowed books. He sat in on extension lectures at the agricultural college at the back of the room, where the young students assumed he was a janitor. He talked to agronomists and water engineers and old farmers who had survived 3 generations of bad seasons. He asked questions without embarrassment. He took notes in a small brown notebook that he kept in his back pocket. And slowly, what he had always known became something he could also say. He learned that the south field had what soil scientists call hydric characteristics, soil that alternates between saturation and drought stress in ways that conventional irrigation systems, calibrated for average conditions, could not handle. The sensors the consultants installed measured moisture at surface level. They did not account for the way the clay subsoil layer, sitting about 40 centimeters down, trapped water in wet months and then cracked and repelled water in dry ones, creating a perched water table that drowned roots in February and starved them in August. Elias had known this. He had compensated for it for 22 years with hand-dug relief channels and a carefully timed irrigation schedule he had developed through trial and error across a decade. When he left, that knowledge left with him, and no sensor in the world could replace it because no sensor had been told what to look for. He learned that the eastern ridge exhausted its nitrogen faster than the rest of the property because of its aspect. It faced southwest, received more direct afternoon sun, and the microbial activity in the soil was higher than average, burning through organic matter quickly. He had compensated for this by rotating in a legume crop every 3rd year before anyone told him to. The new technicians, following their standard rotation schedule, had skipped this and the ridge had slowly become what agronomists call tired soil. He learned things he already knew, and then he learned why they were true. And then he turned that knowledge into a plan. Don Rinaldo did not come to him. Elias went to Don Rinaldo. He called politely and asked for a meeting. He was kept waiting for 2 weeks. When he finally sat across from Don Rinaldo at the kitchen table of the farmhouse, the same table where 17 years ago Elias had eaten Christmas dinner as a guest of the family, Don Rinaldo looked older and smaller than he remembered. "Elias," he said, with something complicated in his voice. Not quite an apology, not quite pride either. "What is it you want?" Elias placed a folder on the table. Inside was a detailed land assessment, soil profiles, water table data, yield projections, a 10-year restoration plan. He had prepared it himself with help from one agronomist he had befriended at the college. It was professional. It was precise. It was written in the language of clipboard men. "I want to buy the farm," Elias said. Don Rinaldo almost laughed. "Elias, this farm is worth—" "I know what it's worth," Elias said calmly. "And I know what it's worth to the bank you've borrowed from. Those are different numbers." There was a silence. "I also know," Elias continued, "what it would take to bring it back. I've written it here, page 12. Don Rinaldo did not look at page 12 for a long moment. Then he did. The sale was finalized on a Thursday morning in early November. Elias drove through the main gate, his gate now, in the same modest white pickup with the cracked mirror. He parked near the old equipment shed and sat for a moment with the engine off. Then he got out and walked the rows. He walked slowly, the way he had always walked them. Not inspecting exactly, more like listening. He crouched near the south field and pushed 2 fingers into the soil and felt what the sensors had missed for 3 years. He walked the eastern ridge and pulled up a handful of earth and brought it close to his face and smelled it. He found the old relief channels he had dug by hand, most of them clogged now, and he made notes. He hired 4 people from the town, not consultants, not technicians, workers who knew the land and wanted to learn more about it. He taught them everything he knew, and he learned from them too. In the first season, he did not try to maximize yield. He tried to heal. He reopened the relief channels. He rested the eastern ridge and planted a legume cover crop that cost money without producing sellable fruit. He adjusted the irrigation system the consultants had installed, not by replacing it, but by programming it the way he would have designed it, accounting for the clay subsoil layer for the southwest aspect of the ridge, for the particular rhythms of that particular land. People watched from the road and shook their heads. "He's going too slow," they said. "He's not using what he has," they said. "He's an old man farming like it's 30 years ago." Let me describe the second harvest for you. It is a Saturday morning in October, and the south field is heavy with fruit. Not just adequate fruit, not just acceptable fruit. The kind of fruit that makes the people picking it stop and hold it up and look at it. The color, the weight, the way it sits in the palm. The melons are so round and dense that you can feel their gravity. The tomatoes along the western ridge are a deep, unbroken red. The workers move through the rows quietly, steadily, with the particular silence of people doing satisfying work. Elias stands at the edge of the south field. He has not slept much. He has been walking the rows since before sunrise. His knees ache. His boots are wet. There is soil under his fingernails and a small cut on his left hand from a wire he had not seen in the dark. He looks at the field. He does not smile, not immediately. He stands there for a long time, the way a man stands when something has been resolved that took years to resolve. The feeling is too large for an expression. It fills the chest and sits there, quiet and heavy and warm, like the morning sun on a field that has finally come back to what it was always supposed to be. One of his workers, a young man named Ray, comes up beside him. "Don Elias," he says. And there is something almost careful in the way he says it, as if he senses he is standing near a moment he will describe to people later. It's something, isn't it? Elias is quiet for a moment. The land was always good, he says finally. It just needed someone who understood it. Word travels fast in small towns and slower in proud men. Don Ronaldo heard about the harvest from his cousin, who had driven past the farm and stopped to buy fruit from the roadside stand Elias had set up near the gate. He drove out himself a week later on a pretense. He said he had left something in the storage shed, but there was nothing in the storage shed that belonged to him anymore. He walked the rows with Elias that afternoon. They did not speak much. Don Ronaldo looked at the south field for a long time. The consultants ran full diagnostics, he said, not quite to Elias, not quite to himself. Sensors everywhere, every system checked. They couldn't find what was wrong. They were looking at the data, Elias said simply. The problem wasn't in the data. Don Ronaldo turned to look at him. I should not have called you an old hand, he said. I should not have let them say that. Elias considered this. You were trying to modernize, he said. That's not wrong. The machines are good. The sensors are useful. You just needed someone who could tell the machines what they didn't know. It was a generous thing to say. Don Ronaldo knew it was more generous than he deserved. They walked back to the gate in the low afternoon light. Before Don Ronaldo got into his car, he paused. Your father would have liked to see this, he said. My father taught me how to read this land, Elias said. So, in a way, he does. In the years that followed, the farm expanded its reputation in ways that numbers alone could not explain. Elias entered into supply agreements with 3 regional cooperatives. He invited the agricultural college to use 2 hectares for research purposes. Specifically, the study of what happens when traditional knowledge is integrated with modern soil monitoring. The young technicians who came to work on that research project spent their first week following Elias through the rows, and they came away from those walks changed in some quiet way they could not immediately articulate. He kept the sensors. He kept the irrigation system. He added 2 more of his own design, adjustments that accounted for what he knew and what the machines could now be told to measure. The data and the knowledge fed each other in a way neither could achieve alone. He hired locally. He paid well. He taught anyone who wanted to learn. He also did something that surprised people. He called it the open row. Every 3rd Saturday, the farm gate was open to anyone in the community who wanted to come and walk the land, ask questions, bring their children. Families would come in the morning when it was cool and walk the furrows and pick a melon or a tomato and eat it standing there in the field, and Elias would explain to whoever asked why this patch of soil was different from that one, why this crop grew where it grew, why the land had moods and seasons and needs just like anything living. He said it was the most important thing he did. Machines are tools, he told a journalist who came to write about the farm. But the land is not a machine. It is a relationship. And you cannot automate a relationship. You can only learn to be present in it. There is a photograph in the main office of the farm now. It is a simple photograph taken by Ray, the young worker, on an ordinary phone on an ordinary morning. It shows Elias standing at the edge of the south field, the one that had stumped every sensor and defeated every consultant. He is facing away from the camera. He is looking at the field. The light is early morning light, the kind that comes in at a low angle and makes everything golden and long-shadowed. He looks exactly like what he is, a man who knows where he stands. The consultants with their clipboards came armed with technology and certainty and the vocabulary of efficiency. They measured everything that could be measured. They optimized everything that could be optimized. And still, the land resisted them, not out of stubbornness, but because the land had a logic that their instruments were not calibrated to detect. Elias had been calibrated to detect it. not by a university or a software company or a satellite, but by 22 years of showing up before sunrise and paying attention, by being present, by being in every season exactly where he was needed. He had been dismissed as an old hand. He returned as the owner. But here is what matters most. What lingers after the legal documents are filed and the harvests are counted and the story has been told in the way stories eventually are. The land did not change when Elias was fired from it. The land was still good. The land was still full of potential, still carrying within it the ability to produce something extraordinary. It had simply lost the person who understood it well enough to let it be what it was. That is the lesson. Not that Elias was exceptional, though he was. Not that the consultants were foolish. They were not. The lesson is simpler and harder than either of those things. Knowledge without presence is incomplete. Technology without wisdom is expensive guessing. And the most powerful thing a person can possess is the patient, accumulated understanding of the place where they have given their years. They called him an old hand. But old hands, you see, remember everything. And the land never forgot him either.